Hello and welcome to Student Affairs Live, the online learning community for student affairs educators. I am your host, Heather Shea Gasser from Michigan State University. Today, I'm grateful for the opportunity to engage in a dialogue about the intersections between race, ethnicity, culture, and identity within the LGBTQ Latinx community and the implications of these intersections for student affairs. We welcome your comments, questions, and participation. Follow along on the back channel and tweet to the hashtag HigherEdLive. If you're watching as a staff today, we'd love to know who you are and where you're at, and we'll give you a little shout out. And as always, thank you to my good friends and colleagues Valerie Hureska and Alex Sylvester for helping me out with the back channel again today. In a moment, I'm going to introduce you to the 8 panelists who have joined me, but first I need to give a shout out to those who make Student Affairs Live possible. We are a part of the Higher Ed Live network. You can tune in to episodes with my amazing friend and co-host Tony Duty and me on Wednesdays at 1 p.m. Eastern Time. If you're unfamiliar with past episodes, we highly recommend that you check out and favorite the archive link that we are tweeting out now. Higher Ed Live is produced by M. Stoner, a marketing and communications firm that works with education institutions on branding, strategy, web design, and more. We're about to share a link to M. Stoner's new ebook on information architecture. A well-thought-out, well-organized structure for your content will make it easier for visitors to find information and engage with your institution. The ebook includes best practices and examples. Download it now. Student Affairs Live is also exclusively sponsored by ACPA, College Student Educators International. ACPA believes that Student Affairs Live is one of the many ways that you can be innovative with your own professional development. The call for programs for ACPA 2017 is now out. We are tweeting out a link where you can submit your program proposal today. All right. So on each episode of Higher Ed Live and Student Affairs Live, my co-host Tony Duty and I endeavor to identify panelists who bring a multitude of perspectives, experience levels, identities, and institutional types to the conversation. No panel is perfect, yet on my last episode, we missed the opportunity to include a Latinx voice as we discussed the shooting in Orlando, whose victims were primarily Latinx and LGBTQ. As host, I see this as a problem and a mistake that I own, and I am grateful to the vocal people on Twitter who engaged with me and who made space for this conversation to happen today. In identifying my own positionality as white cisgender woman who uses she, her, hers pronouns, I recognize the privileges I hold based on these identities, and I know that feedback provides an opportunity for me to do my own self-work and learn, and nearly 2 decades into my career in student affairs, I'm still learning. So after the last episode, we began working towards today's show, identifying panelists and discussing how to engage in a deeper and richer dialogue about these intersections between race, culture, identity, and student affairs work from an LGBTQ Latinx perspective. So in our preparation, the panelists and I had a number of group hangouts to talk. Keith stated this goal: how do we move beyond simply desiring to provide initial support in the wake of incidents to getting folks to a place where there is consciousness that doesn't cause harm? How do we change larger systems? So I deeply appreciate this goal, and I look forward to the conversation today. We have 8 phenomenal individuals on the call. We're going to tweet out a link right now where you can read their detailed bios, and I'm going to have each of them introduce themselves to you so you know a little bit about their backgrounds and connection to this topic. So we're going to start with Trace.
Hi everybody, my name is Trace Camacho, and I currently am the Assistant Dean of Students and Director of Fraternity and Sorority Programs at the University of Arizona. I recently completed my PhD in Higher Adult and Lifelong Learning at Michigan State University, where my dissertation focused on the experience of gay Latino men in higher education. As identities that I carry with me, I identify as a gay Latino male, also first-generation college student, and also some previous work besides my dissertation work. I previously was a research associate with the National Study of LGBT Student Success.
Great. Thanks, Trace. Thanks for being here. Dora.
Buenos dias. Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Dora Frias. I am currently the program director of the Latino Student Services program at the University of Colorado, Denver. I have worked in multicultural centers, student support services, TRIO programs, and now specifically working in an identity-based center focusing on the experiences of Latinx students on college campuses. I use she, her pronouns. I was born in Durango, Mexico, and grew up on the borderlands of Texas and Mexico. And those are the things that very much inform my identity and what I bring to this space today.
Thanks so much, Doras. Keith, welcome.
Unmute myself. Sorry about that. Hi, my name is Keith Garcia. I am at the University of Minnesota Twin Cities campus. I work in the Office of Fraternity and Sorority Life, advising our Pan-Hellenic and Multicultural Councils. My identities are Latino. I am also a gay male. Pronouns are he, him, his. I think my interest and focus within higher education are rooted around identity development, particularly intersectionality and the importance of approaching our work with an intersectional lens. And so that's kind of who I am and where I'm coming from.
Thanks so much, Keith, for being here today. Zahes.
Hello, everyone. My name is Zahes Martinez, and I am a coordinator in the Office of Fraternity and Sorority Life at Colorado State University. They, them, theirs pronouns are what value and empower me. I am a trans, queer, identified professional in student affairs, and recognizing the roots of Indigenous Mexico and trying to identify what that means to me as a second-generation U.S. American and processing how all of that connects to student affairs. So glad to be here.
Thank you so much for joining us. Julio.
Right, I'm muting myself too. Buenos días, buenas tardes. I am Julio Herreoyola. I use they series pronouns or any pronouns that are used respectfully, please. I'm currently Assistant Director of LGBTQ Services at Massachusetts Institute of Technology. I grew up in Mayagüez, Puerto Rico. I went to school in Miami and Orlando, Florida, and I've lived between the Bay Area and Southern California for 5 years before relocating here. Among many other things within my job, I work closely with our Office of Multicultural Programs to provide intersectional support, education, and advocacy regarding our minoritized students on our campus, as well as with our Violence Prevention and Response Unit on healthy relationships, consent, and gender privilege, as well as some allyship and bystander work with conflict management at MIT.
Great. Julio, thanks for joining us. Ray.
Well, good morning, good afternoon. My name is Ray Plaza. I serve as the Director of Diversity and Inclusion here at Santa Clara University. I use he, him, his pronouns. I also serve as chair of the ACPA Latino, Latina, Latinx network. My parents are from Cabo Rojo, Puerto Rico, and I grew up in Miami. And in my work, I do a lot of stuff with the training of faculty and staff around LGBTQ related issues and within our campus community.
Thanks so much for being here, Ray. Marcela.
Buenos días, Marcela Ramirez, California born and bred, spent my entire life here. She, her, hers pronouns. I've been in student affairs, higher education for 10 years, background in student life, career center work, international services, multicultural center specifically. I'm now a 5th year full-time PhD student. This is it. This is the last year. At UC Riverside, I study cultural centers and higher education. I'm also the voting student regent on the University of California Board of Regents. This is important because I'm the first out queer woman in this position and the first out queer woman of color on the board. So thank you for having me.
Thank you so much. Brianna.
Hi everyone, my name is Brianna Serrano. I am currently the coordinator of the Pride Center at California State Polytechnic University, Pomona. My pronouns are they, them, and theirs. My research interests include serving undocumented students, specifically queer and trans Latinx students, and their academic challenges and identity management that they have to navigate. And I'm also one of the people of color co-chairs for the Consortium of Higher Education LGBT Resource Professionals, and I'm really excited to be here.
Great. It is wonderful to have all of you on today, and it's awesome to see so many people tuning in as well. So we're going to start with just clarifying language, because I think that's an important place to begin. So Zahes, can you tell us what we mean when we say Latinx?
I can definitely start, particularly since I've spent some significant time reflecting on it. Latinx is a descriptor predominantly used to identify folks of Spanish or Latin American heritage and descent. the way in which Latinx developed really has some significant draws to what the X signifies, particularly looking at Latin as a word, and then Latino and Latina encompassed in the binary of masculine and feminine in the Spanish language. And even when gender inclusion became part of the conversation with Latina or Latinois, as folks used to try and distort some of what the Spanish language has in some of those binaries, Latinx really became the term to help both include more folks and also defy some of those expectations that come from using the Spanish language and challenging some of these actual systems of patriarchy that are really ingrained in the culture.
Great. Other folks want to share what this means to them and if you've faced any resistance in using this word.
I'll add a piece about just some of the pushback around Latinx, and the pushback being that it's a buzzword and that it doesn't really address any of the systemic issues within the Spanish language. And I think that for me this is a both and. No, does it address the system? No, it doesn't. And it is a way in which we can start to improve and address some of the inequalities in our language. And then I think it's also important for us to name that where our privileges sometimes lie in the ways in which we push back on language, right? And as a cis queer woman, I've got to do my own work around some of those pieces and work to embrace when students are telling me this is a word that I use to identify, really trying to work and understand why that is.
Yeah, I think of it as a calculated disruption in the same way that women XN or women YN is trying to tell a different story, is trying to report a complicated narrative. So I think for folks, Latinx says that, right? And it gives us the opportunity to say what it means to us, and that the X is not the same for everybody, but let's start a conversation.
Another element that I think it needs to be named is in the conversations that we have with each other or with our students based on where we are, where they are, what informs those identities is just the connection to the term Latino, Latina, Latinx in general, right? Versus other identities like if they identify as Chicano or Chicana first, or if they use the term Hispanic, right? And thinking about the history behind some of these terms and why someone may or may not choose to kind of feel some affinity in using this and embracing that, which, we all, I think we have at least 9 possibly different perspectives right now on this panel on that very, very same question.
Anyone else want to jump in? All right, let's move on to, yeah, go ahead, Trace.
Just as it was just brought up, that Latinx is a broad diaspora of many different identities, and that it's not just this one blanket identity group that has all similar experiences. There's some shared experiences, but it's a broad diaspora of people that make up this identity that we have called Latinx.
Great. Thanks for pointing that out. It's clear that language matters, and I also recognize what Dora mentioned as far as the privilege related to that. So let's move on to talking about this intersection of culture, religious faith, spiritual practice, race and ethnicity. Like, how did that all influence experience with gender, performance, and sexuality? Marcel, I think you're going to start on this one.
Yeah, I'm going to jump in a little bit in terms of, I guess I'll just start with contextual stories. So my mom is a strong person of faith and practice, but always told me that, faith and spirit and the divine is here. And my relationship with the divine is a conversation that I'm constantly in, that it wasn't in a building and that it wasn't necessarily in a book. That the written word can be powerful, but that my conversation with myself and the divine is really, I think, the mandate and the thing that propels me to function in all of my excellence and all of my truth. So I think the piece about truth-telling and spirit and divinity and ancestral power is something that I got very strongly from my mother. And I want to sort of like give her that. And I think that I'm in constant conversation with my ancestors. this is what we do. Dia de los Muertos is about cultura. Dia de los Muertos is about a lineage. Dia de los Muertos is about owning the places that we come from, right? It's not trendy. It's not a trendy thing. It's not fancy to put on some paint and you know, light a candle and put a sticker on it. Like that's not what this is about, right? I think that there is faith and there is strength and there is power behind all of that. And I think that how it shows up for me in terms of gender and sexuality really was about living my truth. So when I came out to my mom, I said, you know what, Mom, you always told me to be who I am. You told me like not to tell a lie, not to keep things from you. So I need to be honest about who I am, the decisions that I'm making, and how I'm going to move forward. I have a supportive family now. I wasn't always like that. I don't want to bypass the difficulty around that coming out process. But I do want to say that it was very much based in faith and tradition and my cultura, and also in really connecting to and feeling that if we have ancestral trauma, we can also have ancestral healing, and that I can do something about that, right? That I can insert some type of divinity and power to release perhaps the tension and the inability from my ancestors to be out in the way that I am out now. So I think that's how I wanted to connect it and sort of begin this conversation around religion, faith, spirituality, cultura, and how it connects to us as a people within our chosen gender and sexual identities.
Julio, do you want to follow up on that? I know during our prep we talked about you talking next.
Sure. There are just a couple of things that that come up for me when I think about this, right? And as far as our gender expression or how we embrace sexuality, how we identify, you know, as far as connecting it to faith and spirituality, I don't particularly practice any faith. I'm not a religious person, so that's also something to name and give space for among you know our community, and thinking about the expectations that come with that, with being in this community, and the heavy, not the heavy attention that's placed on it, but how that is prevalent, right? How it's prominent, and thinking about when people are understanding themselves and their identities, we can feel pride in some spaces and around some people, and simultaneously hold some internalized racism and internalized homophobia in others, and it's a lot to navigate based on what we have around us, the messages that we're receiving, if they're positive or negative, even when we're coming out, how we're socialized, really have a significant impact on that. And you know, in thinking about familia also, if we have, for example, our end-of-year recognition ceremonies or graduation ceremonies that really embrace the success of one as the success of the family. For some, we don't have our family of origins behind us. We have chosen family, and we're making it on our own, or some of our students making it on their own. So they're embracing, you know, themselves and leading into success on their own terms, right? And that may be at the expense of being, you know, dispelled from their families for not holding up a certain standard of what a man is supposed to act like or a woman is supposed to act like, and holding that integrity and that authenticity with you as you're moving forward and trying to overcome a lot of that.
Anyone else want to jump in?
If possible, I'd like to jump in.
For sure.
So I think for me, I wasn't raised in the Catholic household. I was raised in what now I understand to be evangelical Christian, and I was always told it's not Adam and Eve, it's Adam and Steve. And so in my mind, I thought I was going to burn in hell. And when I realized how I identify sexually speaking, that was hard for me. And both of my parents were raised Catholic. And I just want to give a name to Catholicism from my purview. I mean, we were indigenous bodies in this land, and we were colonized by the Spaniards. And so that came to us in a very violent way, to where we were forced to act a certain way, and even two-spirit folks. And so I just want to name that. That comes from colonization. That doesn't come from the root of where I feel my ancestors came from. And so when I came out as gender nonconforming to my parents, probably like within the past year, that was hard for me, because I was raised in this environment to where you're supposed to act a certain way and dress a certain way if you're female assigned at birth. And so at the same time recognizing and telling myself that probably my ancestors were too spirited in some way, and so this is affirming for me. And my mom always tells me, Mija, and she calls me Mija, you know, you wouldn't be here if God didn't want you to be. And so I don't conform to any specific religious identity, but I have my own relationship with God, and I'm good.
Awesome. Anyone else want to share a little bit about their perspective on this tension?
I do have a piece I'd like to add, Heather.
Yeah.
I think for me, so I grew up Catholic. I identify as culturally Catholic. For me, my culture is very, very tied to the Catholic religion. And I remember growing up, for me, the very clear, distinct messages that I got specifically as a Latina woman, what was expected of me, and in terms of finding a husband, right, and raising kids, and even getting messages about gender performativity and what that meant. And as I began to come out, I struggled with this piece around, am I not going to be Latina enough, right, because I'm not going to have a man, or my family will look different. There were also pieces for me around my hair, right? And as Latina women, like, our beauty is so tied to our hair. And I struggled a lot with not feeling comfortable in the long hair for a long time. And it was this tension that existed for me around, how do I make sense of my Latinx identity at the intersection of gender, sexual orientation, gender expression, and all those things that have been complicated and have taken me a while to understand for myself, and it's still something that I'm consistently negotiating.
So you just mentioned intersectionality. I think that's kind of at the crux of a lot of what we're talking about today. And Keith, can you kind of briefly define what it means to think intersectionally, and how we go about, maybe in the second part, go about fostering that perspective in our approach in student affairs work?
Sure. So I think that when it comes to folks who have or own identities that are often targeted or marginalized, intersectionality is it's language that we don't necessarily use, but it's experiences that we have and things that we know, right? So for me, my identity as a gay man is inextricably linked to my identity as a Latino, and they don't necessarily operate in separate spaces. And sometimes they can. It depends on the context of where I am. But intersectionality and the approach to kind of understanding the world from this lens of, I don't just look at this as a man, I don't just look at this as a gay man, I don't just look at this as a Latino, all of those things are working together. And so being conscious of that and how that informs my work, I work with predominantly women-identified students here at the university, and so I have to take into account that, what does it mean when I'm working with them as a cisgendered male, and how my communication with them might be perceived, or what it is that I'm doing with them that might cause some tension, or things that aren't jiving because they don't necessarily have the same lens that I do. So I think with respect to intersectionality, it's about understanding who you are, understanding where you're coming from, the perspectives that you lend to the dialogue and the experience that you're having with other folks. And then when it comes to student affairs work and thinking a little bit more broadly, I think it's about folks kind of doing some self-exploration, learning about who they are, taking the time to figure out what your identities are, how salient are those identities to you. I think about, the Abe Jones McEwen, multiple dimensions of identity, right? The saliency of those things, but also the meaning-making component, and how certain things might lend themselves to how you perceive of what's going on in the world around you or in the experiences that you have. One of the things that I always tell people, and I'm really intentional about this, is I work with two very different groups in the realm of fraternity and sorority life. And the reason for that is largely based on how I understand how students have been supported historically in this particular facet within higher education. So, being a part of a historically Latino fraternity, for me, that experience has informed my understanding that maybe when I come into work in the morning, I need to start working with the things that my multicultural Greek students need first, because the moment I step into the world of Panhellenic, which is this really dominant space, it's really difficult for me to get out of that world. And so I'm really intentional that when I come in the morning, I'm checking my emails and filtering through them to ensure that the answers to those students who within this institution sometimes don't always feel supported, feel like there's someone here that's supporting them and doing the work that they expect from the institution that they've chosen to attend. So I think that that's how intersectionality has influenced my work. It's how I like to dialogue with colleagues and peers about how they might be able to consider intersectionality in their work. I was fortunate enough to work with a good friend of mine, Nathan Olmeda, and one of my mentors, Dr. Juan Guardia, on an article about being gay Latino men and how that influences our approaches to our work within fraternity and sorority life. So those are the kinds of things that I think inform approaches, is how are you taking the time to learn about who you are, what you bring to the table, and how does that manifest itself in your work?
Definitely. Shout out to Juan. We wanted him to participate today, but in the process of moving to Cincinnati. So
Yeah.
Other folks who want to talk a little bit about intersectional approaches to your work, Marcela?
Yeah, so really quickly, I'm going to jump in broadly in terms of folks thinking about the specific departments, areas, the way your university is structured, and I want to start by saying this. Students don't experience their lives or the world in the way that we structure them.
Yes.
Flat out. So Kimberly Crenshaw's gift of intersectionality, right? We've got to give that shout out. That gift of intersectionality really talked about race and ethnicity being at the core. At that time, race and ethnicity at the core of gender. But I want to emphasize that if you're doing LGBT work, you've got to also do the work of race and ethnicity, or else it's not intersectionality. So race and ethnicity at the core, right? And LGBT, race and ethnicity and ability, race and ethnicity and colorism. We've got to talk about that. We had a little bit of comments earlier about, the look, right? The skin color, the hair, the manifestations of our face, our walk, our talk, the structure of our body. I think for the Latinx community, like specifically, we might be Latinos, Chicanos, whatever that might be, but racially, our racial constructs are across the board. Giving shout outs to, Afro-Latinos that I know are absolutely powerful and that do this work, right? This notion that there are white Latinos, that is, I will admit, a conflicting piece for me, but for some folks that is their reality. And that is how they identify, and we've got to talk about that. So colorism also is an aspect when we're talking about intersectionality and how it manifests in racial and ethnic bodies, and really without complicating this term, we cannot serve our students well. So we have got to complicate this in every single area across our institutions.
Can I add on something?
For sure.
And I would say, and looking at retention for students, I mean, if they don't see themselves in what we're doing, they're not going to stay. They're not going to have a sense of belonging. And I remember during an interview for my current position, the Dean of Students asked me, Brianna, what are you going to do if you want to do collaborative intersectional work? And somebody says that they don't want to do that, or maybe it's something they haven't done before. And I'd say, well, you need to serve the students or you shouldn't be working here. And in all honesty, that's what we need to do, because they feel so much more affirmed when those conversations happen, or they see themselves even within us. And I think that's something for folks to keep in mind as well for hiring managers, to realize that there's less queer and trans people of color that are directors of LGBT work and also in higher senior level positions, and creating a pipeline for us and not staying in a position for over 30 years. But creating access points for us as well.
To the point, I think two pieces that stood out to me. The first from Marcela, where she talked about colorism within the community and the consistent dialogue that I have in the spaces I operate in about what it means to be a Latino man that can't pass for white, right? Because I do have Latino friends, fraternity brothers, colleagues who can and who utilize that privilege in very different ways. Or don't use it at all. And so I think that that's a really important part for me about the conversation sometimes around intersectionality, that just because we are Latino men or identify similarly in those ways, just how we show up in the world and how people see us and perceive of us is going to have an effect on how they engage us, how we engage with them. Those things are really important to know. And then to the point that Brianna made about the role of representation and seeing people, I talk to folks all the time about how troubling it is sometimes in my bubble, in my world of fraternity and sorority life, that to be a director, often it's almost as if you have to have this requisite experience with these predominantly white fraternity and sorority communities But if you don't have experience with culturally based fraternities and sororities, you know, we can look past that. And that's problematic. And I think that that's something that I work really hard to challenge in the work that I do, because my expectation is that if you're going to come into this space, if you're going to facilitate this work, then there's an expectation that you have consciousness of the entirety of the community you're going to work with, and that you be prepared to do that, whether you look like me or not. Because, right, I don't necessarily prescribe to the notion that you have to look like me or be from my community to serve me well, but you surely should have some context about who you're working with, and understanding and knowledge and competency. And so those two things kind of stood out to me, and I think that those are things that really drive me passionately towards this conversation, why intersectionality is so important.
I also want to insert some thoughts in here, because everything, like I dropped the mic a few times in my head from everything that y'all are saying, because it's right on point. And I also want to name, you know, for really everybody, we learn from mistakes, right? We're going to be making mistakes as we go along if we want to work and strive towards inclusion, and to really be careful around asking students to prove their identities, right? Because of the multiplicity of all of our communities, right? Whether it's their involvement in certain organizations, whether they are activists, right? Like, because of everything that has already been stated, those are the reasons why we have Latinos involved in the Black Lives Matter movement, right? We exist in all of these spaces, right? Conversations around immigration and citizenship, it's not Latinx exclusive, right? We have folks from all over that are part of these conversations. So to really be conscious and think about that before making that decision to ask somebody to kind of prove or validate their existence.
And they have to be doing that on a regular basis. I mean, there's a lot of femme shaming that happens. There's a lot of checklists in regards to identities that exist, like bisexuality and queerness and pansexual identity, and also transness, is if you're red or not. And so I think that's something important for us to include in our regular discourse as student affairs professionals, whether or not we know that students are LGBT.
All right, so I'm going to move to Trace. Trace, within your research, you have looked at an intersectional approach to fraternity work, for sure. And maybe you can unpack the dominant narratives around kind of ecological models, Boundarylands Theory, and some of the things that you drew upon when you were doing that research.
Sure. So first, it's important to point out that higher education is not the first scholarly community to take up the work of studying queer Latinx topics. These topics have been studied for a long time in other fields, ethnic studies, literary theory. So I think it's important to acknowledge that, because as a researcher within higher ed, I drew upon those other fields of study to inform my practice. And I think that's important, that we don't just look within higher ed with doing our own research, that there's a wealth of knowledge already out there about this topic. So my research drew a lot on Boundarylands Theory, which is Gloria Ambledua's work from her book. And I really use it to kind of push this idea of intersectionality, of kind of what everyone said, it's not one or the other, it's both and. It's actually this third space where I'm both, and I'm recreating what I'm defining for myself, what it means to be a gay Latino, acknowledging that, you know, for me that is a very cisgender, you know, narrative for me and in my study, because I'm primarily working with men, and I use the term Latino, because I hear students from all over. But I think for me, it's important to have that kind of theoretical foundation, because students are constructing how they view their identity all the time, whether you're thinking of Abe Jones and McEwen and their meaning-making filter. But for me, Boundarylands Theory really helped me frame the idea that students are developing how they define their identity, recreating in ways that sometimes faster than we as student affairs professionals can keep up programmatically, advisingly, and how we advise students with how they think about their identity. So I think it was a way for me to think fluidly about identity and the way students enact and kind of define their identity. And I layered that with an ecological approach in my work, because I think it's important, especially when talking about identity-based issues. It's not about how a student defines that identity internally, it's also about all these ecological layers that play into that, their peer group, the institution they're in, the geographical place that they're situated within this country, how their religious practice, as we talked about briefly, played into it, how their, their identities play into it. So there's this whole ecological level that's influencing how students are enacting or envisioning or thinking about their identities that we need to take into account. It's not just, what student organizations are choose to join or not. It's not about just, who they, where they come from. It's all those things taken in totality with it. It's not just one thing that we need to focus on when supporting queer Latinx students. I think another important piece, and I know we're going to get to this a little bit later, is that, in my work, I look not just at fraternity and sorority members. 7 of my participants happen to be fraternity and sorority members, but I think it's also important that we have students who are pushing the boundaries of, what people think is acceptable in these traditional male or traditionally gendered spaces. So, gay members of Latino fraternities, some of them are having a poor experience, some are having a really great experience, and we need to acknowledge that there's not just this deficit narrative about the experience for students who identify as queer Latinx. And I think, some of the great work being put out right now is really challenging this dominant deficit model narrative. But I think there's a lot of great perspectives that have already been brought up about that.
So I want to talk about what Dora mentioned earlier around structure and think a little bit about kind of how we're structuring our student affairs divisions. Many of you on here work in multicultural affairs offices or LGBT offices, several folks from fraternity and sorority life. What are some of the effective models for building collaborative spaces across student affairs? And how can we specifically make LGBT spaces more welcoming to students of color and multicultural affairs offices more welcoming to LGBT students? So, Brianna, do you want to start with that?
Yeah, sure. I think, first of all, like I said before, pipeline is an issue, right, for queer and trans people of color, especially Latinx folks and Black folks, for gaining access to these types of positions. And I also want to name that if folks are white and they're in director positions, coordinator positions, whatever it may be, I think it's incredibly important for white folks to hold each other accountable, and also for them to name, yes, I am a part of this white supremacist society, and everything is built for my privilege. And so I think naming that may resonate differently with students, and maybe more in a positive way than just existing as a white person. And I think also creating those intentional bridges with other colleagues on campus that do race work. And I think that's important to do a work on anti-Blackness within the LGBT community, or do a session on racism that even occurs, or microaggressions, or the use of new terms that communities of color use, like Latinx or Joto or Jota, or other words that we're reclaiming, or same gender loving. And so not just this narrative of this white dominant discourse. And so I think it's important to be visible, to create programs that include intersectionality. And I think one thing that I've noticed for myself, at least, is that it has become a space for students of color to feel comfortable, but then I have white students sharing with me that they don't maybe feel as included because, I'm so centered on queer trans people of color experiences. And how do I have those conversations with students, and knowing that they're moving along in their identity development through Helms or through anything else that they're experiencing? And so just me being conscious of that when I work with white students, and how I may come across as a person of color.
Mm-hmm.
Dora?
Yeah, you asked about, effective models, and I think that there are probably folks that are doing good work, and I don't know if there is an effective model yet, right, of how to exactly do this. In the wake of Orlando, I really struggled a lot with, if I send students to the multicultural space, my space included, will they feel validated in their queer identity? And if I send students to the LGBT office, will that office be able to support the complexities of the racial piece? And so then I felt a lot of personal responsibility as one of few queer Latinas on this campus. I don't even know of any others. That I had to hold that for students, and that's exhausting. And I'm experiencing my own trauma at the same time. And if I don't show up, then who's going to do it, right? So I think it's important for us to name that weight on us as professionals individually, and because of that, we've got to be working with our allies. We've got to be working in conjunction with folks. Supporting Latino, Latinx, Latinx students on this campus can't just be my job, right? And as I look across institutions, you know, at my previous institution, I was the only Latina in the entire division of student affairs. So, you know, we don't have representation in the ways like Brianna mentioned, the pipeline, right? It's just not there. So it's a complex issue, and I keep saying, like, the Latinos are coming. We're a very young population. They're gonna be showing up at our institutions, and inevitably, because we're gonna have more Latinos at our institutions, we're gonna have more Latinx, QTPOC students at our institutions that are experiencing their identities at multiple intersections, and in variety of different identity centers. We've got to be focusing and centering this work on intersectionality, because that's what our students are going to be coming to us with.
And I think also including the trauma that our students may be coming in with, because this is something that they experience from birth, right? And now so many more of them are coming out at a younger age, I notice. But then acknowledging the national climate for them, not just with Orlando, but last year 26 trans women of color were murdered. This year at least 14 were murdered, mostly Black and Latinas, and, you know, trans women. And so I think it's important for us to do recognition that that's actually happening, and which bodies are being policed and which ones aren't. So I think that comes with the intersectionality as well.
Yeah, I think the challenging of the structures really is our role, I believe, as change agents at universities. We've got to push past the limitations of the structures, right? We've got to push past the walls that get created. Those line items sometimes go to specific departments, right? Where does the money flow? What are the hiring practices of the institution? I think that we have got to have critical inquiry about the structure itself. We also have to have critical inquiry about, what does safety mean for you? Are you just uncomfortable? Or are you actually physically unsafe in this space, right? I think we've got to question that, right? Because sometimes, like, notions of safety are sometimes used to uphold the structure, and I think that we've got to complicate that narrative as well. So as much as we can push back on hiring practices, actual funding, line items, where we get critical collaborations from, where we decide the nonprofits, community organizations, institutions that we want to work for, the kind of money that we want to receive, rather than a donor defining how we have to use it. We've got to really dig into all the nooks and crannies of this. So I think structurally, I see this more at the board level than I had ever before. So the more we can push back, the more we can do better for our students.
Zahis, can you talk a little bit about your work in fraternity and sorority life and how you've fostered collaborative spaces and initiatives, and what that looks like within that functional area? Oh, I think you're on mute still.
Okay,
sorry. You're good.
For me, the way that has shown up significantly is being able to be a visible, trans, non-conforming individual of a fraternity or a sorority and actually doing the work. So I'm consistently in front of students. I'm consistently having these conversations with folks who've yet to realize and see a visible person from a trans experience in a binary system, in these experiences that talk about brotherhood and sisterhood and value what it means to be alumni or alumnus, and processing like some of those components. So what I'm recognizing day in and day out, particularly with the multicultural students that I work with in the Multicultural Greek Council, is we're having these consistent conversations of, what does it mean to hold the Latinx identity and to be doing this work in a predominantly white institution? How can you help us better understand, are we welcoming to queer people? Are we actually helping some of that understanding of, yes, we are inclusive to trans-identified individuals, and when we say women, we're talking about women. We're not talking about females. And when we're talking about men, we're talking about men, not males. And just disrupting some of those assumptions that come up within that binary space. What I appreciate about this institution that I'm currently at CSU, the recognition of my presence, even though I'm in fraternity and sorority life, doesn't keep me in fraternity and sorority spaces. In fact, at Centro, our center on campus that works primarily with Latinx students, had a discussion and wanted to create more discussions around, what does it mean to use Latinx, see Latinx, and actually have a discourse around why Latinx has evolved from Latina or Latinoa. How do we talk to, you know, our resource center, because they're talking through the GLBTQ2A resource center, talking about how is it that we not only talk about our queer and trans folks of color, but also our queer and trans folks of color in fraternities and sororities? Do they feel comfortable acknowledging that fraternities and sororities have this systemic challenge, this systemic heterosexist, gender binary, processing of what it means to have this student experience? There's a lot of that that's happening, and even being able to volunteer at the national level with some of the things that Out in Greek and Lambda 10 are doing through Campus Pride, being able to have those national conversations with Latinx fraternities and sororities has been such a powerful experience, talking to them and saying, if you want a trans-inclusive policy, great, I want to help walk you through that. If you don't want a trans-inclusive policy, great, I'll walk you through that. If you don't know yet, let me help you find out how to make some of these conversations happen. Let's work through some of the educational discourse that's needed to talk about educating members about what it means to have a fully validating and empowering queer and trans space. So it's just phenomenal that some of the organizations that are leading some of that work and leading some of those experiences are coming from Latinx fraternities and sororities. And it just happens to be that I can bring that expertise into working with fraternities and sororities on my campus.
I just want to note also the point that Zahis makes. First of all, to thank Zahis for the work that Zahis has done, because as somebody who's part of another Latino fraternity, Zahis's work has shown up in the things that we consider when we look at our policy and the things that we want to embody as a Latinx fraternity. So thinking from that perspective, like, it's important to thank those that are doing the work, and so I wanted to publicly do that and thank Zahis for that work. The other part of it was the part that Zahis spoke to with respect to the intentionality of being engaged in spaces that don't usually wait for us to show up. Most people have some pretty hard perceptions about me when I mention that I work in fraternity and sorority life, and I'm okay with that. I've seen all of the looks. But I think what's important for me is my Multicultural Greek Council also has a fraternity founded by gay men for all men in the form of Delta Lambda Phi. And so how am I also thinking about those groups, right? Like, you know, this is about Latinx and LGBTQ identity together and how they work. And so when things like Orlando happen, I'm not just reaching out to my MGC students, right? I'm reaching out to the Pan-Hellenic women in the community that I work with, because there are queer identified women within our community who maybe aren't as visible. And how am I helping the students that have dominant identities have those conversations? And if they don't know, the Aurora Center here at the University of Minnesota might, or the Gender and Sexuality Center might know. So can we get them in touch with those folks, because they might be able to do a better job than even I can. So I think to speak to that intentionality and partnership with other offices is so important. Like, we can't just sit in our space, right? And other offices also need to seek us out. So thank you, Zahis, for making that point, because I think I just wanted to drive that home.
Okay. And just to add one thing, as we're talking about, current good practices, I think one thing we can't ever underscore enough is, even if students don't use services for identity-based services, organizations, or centers, just them visibly being on campus is a strong message. And through work I did in my own research and with the National Study of LGBTQ Success, just the visual presence and knowing that they're on campus is a strong message to students, queer Latinx students, that, if there's intersectionality work going on, they see it going on, that, this is a place where I belong. So I think it's important to acknowledge just the strong impact, just the visible presence.
Oh no, I think we've lost Trace. Okay, we'll come back to him hopefully if he reconnects. So, Ray, I think some of the things that I've heard bubbling up as this part of this conversation also really, I think, necessitates the professional support that we want to receive across the country and across the world, really, with our professional associations. And I know you are the chair right now of ACPA's Latinx Network, and that has served as a source of support for student affairs educators. So maybe you can talk a little bit about how you've addressed the complexity of race and ethnicity, gender, and sexual identities.
Sure, thanks, Heather. And I think in many ways, we're one of the 5 networks within the Coalition on Multicultural Affairs. So we work closely together, but I think in many ways we see ourselves as that conduit for La Familia. At our most recent convention in Montreal, we had 100 student affairs, Latinx professionals in one room. It goes to Dora's point about there's a lot of young individuals wanting to find their place. And I think the LN, as we for short, provides that opportunity. What can we do to raise these issues within the association? How do we ensure that our voices are involved in the leadership process, whether it be at the governing board level, the involvement level, on the convention planning level? I think that's very critical. And in many ways, they're seeing the work that we're doing. For example, one of our director members, Rick Montalongo, has a writing group for our Latinx colleagues. It's an opportunity for us to give back and grow our own. But when it comes to gender identity expression, I think we as a network have had to look back at our own spaces. It was at the Indianapolis conference in 2014 where we got called out for the fact that some of our spaces were not inclusive, were not open. And I think we had to really have some deep self-reflection about what does that mean. Thinking about familia, oftentimes those that are outsiders don't know some of the things that we do, and it forced us to really think differently about what we needed to do to ensure that our spaces were open to others throughout the diaspora and those pieces. So I want to thank Dora. Dora was part of our directorate, and she helped to raise that issue. And I think we're at a different point today where this past year we've changed our name to include the Latinx. We have 2 advocacy chairs. We've developed an inclusive language brochure. It's part of our discourse of what can we do to ensure that our spaces are much more open and inclusive, so that we can be those role models for our Latinx colleagues that are coming up. So that's the role that we play. And our hope is that we can continue to do that and moving forward. And there's certainly a lot more work that we can do. We have a directorate of 23 individuals from throughout the country. And our hope is to continue to engage via Twitter, Facebook, etc. What can we do? And also to educate folks at the convention through intentional programs. So if you're going to go to ACPA 17 in Columbus, there's going to be a Latinx Leadership Institute as a pre-con workshop. What can we do to give back to ensure that, during these difficult times, what we're finding is many of our peers are the only ones on their campuses. Our hope is that they can reach out to us as a network to be a part of that broader whole for support. And now that we know that we now have 8 other colleagues as part of this webinar, that we can include and use those resources as well.
Marcela, do you want to talk about other associations too? I know you've been involved with NASPA's initiatives too.
Yeah, absolutely. I also I want to start also by recognizing the moment, right, about queer and trans Latinx higher ed professionals sort of like speaking out. There's a reason why there's so many people on this panel, and it's because we come with a village. Mm-hmm. So I want to emphasize this, right? So sort of this pushback that happened with ACPA is also happening within NASPA. Some of us here are actually, sort of the troublemakers behind that push with NASPA, but I want to highlight that this is happening across institutions across the board, right? I want to say also that we have been here. Have we been seen is a different question. Have we been included is a different question. Have we been invited is a different question. But we are going to take up space in ways that perhaps we had not taken up visible space before. So the wave is coming. Put your shorts on because you might get wet. So I think we are going to revamp, again, the way that student affairs and higher education institutions have served us, right? Not just at each of the individual institutions, but also on our campuses. So NASPA last year, a few of us did really a piece again around healing and testimonio and honoring one of our ancestors. I got to give Manuela a shout out. I got to give Brianna a shout out. Brianna, myself, we really revamped what claiming space meant for us, and we are going to have a horizontal leadership pipeline. It's just
I've heard that. I was just adding it.
Yeah, no, go ahead. So that's really just what I want to say. There's parallel processes going on right now across the nation, and I just think we've got to give recognition. We've got to give call out to that. Just get with it. That's pretty much what I'm saying.
I want to add a piece about the word familia, and it's a word that I have often heard both the NASPA Latino Knowledge Community use and the ACPA community use. And I think sometimes we say, well, hey, we're a familia, this is all familia, and we've got to recognize too that for sometimes familia isn't a safe space for folks, and that just because we say this is a familia doesn't make it a safe space, an inclusive space for everybody. And so I want to like caution us on using that, and not to say that we can't use that word. And I think sometimes we just say we're familia, we're all good here, when in reality we're not, right? That we've got stuff that we've got to be addressing in our professional networks.
So let's take it to the online space too. I mean, we have a number of people who are engaging in our back channel today. There are certainly other places that folks gather and share knowledge around student affairs online, Facebook, etc. Brianna, how do we move those conversations from being places of pain and hurt and harm potentially to places of support?
Yeah, I think most recently I noticed for the Student Affairs Professionals Facebook group, that group can be a mess sometimes, just to name it. But I remember when Orlando had just happened, and there were a lot of white, queer, and trans folks who were literally posting something that says, I am allowed to take up space. Like, they were literally posting that. And that struck a chord with me, because afterwards I remember posting, and I never post in that group. I haven't posted in that group since undergrad. And I was like, hey, just a reminder, this was an attack on queer, trans, Latinx, and Black bodies. And there was mostly support from that. There were a few folks who weren't as supportive, but I was not going to go into the educational route for that because I was trying to save my time and energy. And I think something that's really important is for folks to think about the tangible and the practical when doing activist work. And so there was, during marriage equality time, there was a little meme that came out from Ralphie from The Simpsons that had a little rainbow over him, and he said, I'm helping. And really thinking about not changing your profile picture. What is that doing for me? Nothing. That is doing nothing for me. And so really engaging in the community and activism, and how could you go into these grassroots spaces, not to take up space, but to be in solidarity and to do practical work that's creating progress. And so I think that's important when engaging in social media, is what else are you doing?
Awesome. I completely agree with you. I think that's really critical. It's one thing to say you're going to do better. It's another thing to actually do better. Julio, I want to turn to you about kind of summer and being away from campus. And we have lots of students who weren't on our campuses when the Orlando shooting happened. What are the opportunities potentially that lie within our student affairs work to help students once they come back for fall to respond and process? Oh, mute.
Thank you for naming that. You know, the whole incident with Orlando was particularly hard for me. I know that many of the folks that may be even engaging now are probably still living through a lot of that down there. You know, having lived there, having worked at some of the schools that the students attended, and lived, you know, pretty close to where that happened, it was pretty striking for me. And knowing some of the people involved made it even harder, and sharing these identities, it's, you know, it's a shared grief that we all go through. And for many of us as student affairs professionals, we are on our campuses where we, you know, may have had some responses to it from our institutions, may not have, may have been happy with those responses, may not have been. And some of our students, and maybe faculty or other staff, may not have been on our campuses. They may have been in other spaces where they may not be out, right? They might be home, wherever home may be for them. They may be at internships where they can't be out at work. They may be in communities where they cannot be out and they cannot grieve this experience. Coming back in the fall, some of us may be starting in September, thinking about the opportunities that exist there, right? We are, if you want to kind of loop it into existing things that are going on, some easy entry points. If you want to go into like Latinx Heritage Month between September and October, that's one way to wrap it in, right? Indigenous Peoples Day and Coming Out Day are pretty much back to back. They are back to back. That's another entry point into having this conversation. in naming how and coming out, you know, embracing the opportunity to come out through this national holiday that we've kind of claimed for ourselves, but also realizing that a lot of the folks that were killed in this incident were outed through death, right? And now not everybody has the opportunity to be out in these spaces. So to also give room for that, right? Those are collaborations that folks can make across offices, between queer spaces, Latinx spaces. You know, the Black Students Union can be a part of this as well, part of these conversations. These are opportunities to involve absolutely everybody can have a place at the table for this. Dedicated programming, another remembrance ceremony, if you want to make altares on your campuses, if you're advocating for policy reform at your institutions that could be more inclusive, these are all opportunities for you to bring this in. It might not be overt, it might not be in your face, but there are ways for you to include this as a part of the thread and as you're building this fabric of inclusion.
So I think kind of final thoughts. I recognize that we're getting close on the end of our time, but Ray, I want to also recognize that we have folks who are watching today who want to continue the conversation, who may be talking within a staff group or watching this today within a staff group. You know, what are some further questions and topics that we all can explore, whether we're with a group of people right now or not, as we debrief and discuss what we talked about today?
Well, I think Julio mentioned a number of those already as we think about programs that are coming up, but really thinking about who are our Latinx students? Are they graduating? Are they being successful on our campuses? You know, some of us may work on campuses that are designated Hispanic serving institutions, minority serving institutions. What does that mean? Is it just we have the population, or are we being intentional in the types of services that we're providing? Do we know this data? And I would argue that some of us have no idea what the makeup of our students are, what they're doing, and what can we do to be more successful. And I think that adds a wrinkle in terms of what can we do to ensure that they are comfortable. Are we asking the students these questions? You know, here at Santa Clara, we have a multicultural center, 10 different cultural groups. But we often wonder, how well does that multicultural center work closely with our Rainbow Resource Center? What does it mean to be on a religious campus talking about LGBT-related issues? Being on a Jesuit campus, what does that mean when at the Ignatian Q, all of these Jesuit LGBTQ students are coming together and talking about what does faith mean when I talk about my gender identity and expression. So I think this is an opportunity for our colleagues to reflect about what can we do to look at our Latinx students as well as and what can we do to better support not only our students, but what about our faculty and staff? This is not solely the purview of student affairs, but how are we involving our faculty, our staff, and our alumni in the collective work that we're doing to better ensure that our students are successful.
Great, thank you so much. So we're going to share final thoughts, have each of you kind of go through just really quickly, and then one resource, and we have our back channel folks ready to tweet out these resources that you would like to share. So Julio, I'm going to start with you. Any final thoughts?
Oh my gosh, I have several. I would say, you know, to really keep in mind everything that folks have shared around ways to cater and care for your students, your peers, your colleagues. Just hear people out, right? Like that's one way that you can, I guess, essentially take up space without taking up space, right? You're giving them the space to speak. You're giving them the space to share, right? There's opportunities for you to work together. You know, we are just one small slice of the pie of the entire realm that's out there of networks of people that you can, you know, work with and support.
Great. Ray, back to you.
Sure. I think for me, I look at the context. You know, Trace talked about the ecology. We live in a very interesting time in the United States and globally. And I think that we have to consider those dynamics in what we're doing. And I think there's a lot of fear out there. There's a lot of mistrust. But I think that we need to be willing to have these conversations. They're going to be difficult, but we need to move forward, because if we just remain in our silos and be fearful, that's going to lead to some, I think, serious consequences down the road. So I think it's important that we be open and have these conversations and not let fear get in the way.
I agree. Marcella. Oh, mute.
As oh my gosh, as Ray was talking about fear, I was actually thinking about Dora in a workshop that you did about coraje, right, which is a nice mix of courage and rage. So I think right now it's really about how do I utilize my rage? How do I utilize my rage? How do I utilize and channel it, I think, in a more productive manner? I think this thing about being a change agent and data, I want to talk a little bit for a section about how the University of California did it, because the University of California actually does collect data, right, particularly on sexual identity. And we got hit hard by it with the legislature. We got trampled through the state of California, but we were committed to doing it anyway. So we have admissions data. So I think that that is something that can happen in an institution. It's not it's a challenge, but it can be overcome. So I think I've got a lot of feelings post-Orlando. I've got a lot of feelings now about my queer and trans Latinx community, not just in the state, but across the nation. Brianna knows that I show up for people, that I am heart-driven, that I am ride or die, and I will roll through for my community. So I think I want to put that out there for folks, that you can expect that, I think, from some of the folks in this panel, and particularly with those of us at NASPA that are going to propose a QT Latinx healing space. So look out for that. And my heart goes out to everybody that supported this webinar, and for those of you that are going to see it later, I enthusiastically look forward to working with everybody that really cares about this subject.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. Keith. Mute.
Apology. Well, first, I just wanted to say thanks, Heather, for, I think, acknowledging and recognizing some of the hurt that came from the previous episode, and then creating and taking the action of creating the space so that folks could have their voices elevated around these issues that so often go unheard, right? So I want to just appreciate that that's something that we were able to do. And I think final thoughts for me are just, this is ongoing work, but understand that this is ongoing work that are people's lives and their lived experiences. And so sometimes that work is like, I don't want to talk to you, right? Sometimes that work is, I'm going to retreat to my safe space, which might be my office and my cube, and I'm going to be closed and don't bother me. But there is a way to be present, like was mentioned earlier. There's a way to take up space without taking up space, right? And be present for colleagues. When things happen in this world that are really tragic and problematic, but also be there on the regular, because those problematic and tragic events only highlight some of the things that we deal with on a daily basis at a different magnitude. So for me, that's kind of where I would like to see colleagues. I challenge colleagues specifically because at the end of the day, we're the ones who are working with the students directly and facing them, and higher ups and individuals who have some responsibility over how we engage. So those are some of the things that kind of are ruminating in my mind. I got a lot of other thoughts, but I can be here all day. But thank you. I really appreciate the opportunity.
Thanks, Keith. Brianna.
I just also want to say thank you for this opportunity and being here. And I was telling Heather earlier that that was unfortunate that folks were not in the conversation previously, while at the same time, I think that we have gathered a different kind of audience potentially, and a different kind of empowerment that we now are experiencing. And I also want to say, in terms of approaching QT Latinx identities and issues for practitioners, that I've said this before at the NASPA Pre-Conference Latino Knowledge Community Institute, this is a professional development opportunity for you. So irregardless of your personal beliefs or your religious beliefs, whatever it may be, you need to do your job at the end of the day. And if you're not able to do that, then you need to recognize that you're not able to do that and educate yourself and get over it. Because we're in this field for a reason, and it's to serve the students. And if we're not doing that, then we're not being effective. And I would say the one resource that I did put out there is the National Discrimination Survey for the National Center for Transgender Equality. They just did a national survey last year that was done by some folks that I know, and there's a breakdown of race, and the Latinx one is one that I'd encourage folks to look at if they want to see those rates. And also, lastly, I just want to say, please ask your colleagues, how are you doing? Because one thing that Marcella did is show up for the vigil that we had here, and I really appreciated that, because so often we're the ones that have to do this work, right? It's expected of us to meet the status quo every day, and I think that's hard when we're also in pain. And so checking in with each other is very important. And last but not least, I just want to give a shout out to my department that's watching right now, my mom who's watching, Papa, and all my friends and colleagues that are around the country engaging in this discussion. Thank you.
Dora.
Yeah, so Latinx students are coming to a campus near you, right? So put your shorts on, like Marcela said, and we've got to really think about what are we doing to support the intersectional experiences of all students, but specifically given this topic of our Latinx students. Because of the rise in population, that's what we're going to be seeing on our college campuses, and we're not ready. And so at every single office, at every single level, we've got to be talking about what are we doing to support this. And if you're not talking about it, you're too late. Because they're here now, and they're going to continue to show up on our campuses. I also want to give thanks to colleagues on this panel. It's been great to share space and time with you and be in community with you. And certainly, like Marcela has said, I'm here to serve as a resource for folks if further questions are needed. In terms of other resources, Excelencia in Education is a resource that's a great resource doing amazing research on college campuses and the experiences of Latino students. Thanks, y'all.
Thank you so much, Dora. All right, Trace.
Yeah, thank you, like everyone else said, for the opportunity. I learned so much just from the other panelists just in our last hour together, so thank you for that. One, this work is hard. Two, it's complex. So just acknowledge that it's not going to be easy. There's not going to be one easy fix for, supporting queer Latinx students. Like, not a one-size-fits-all for campus. There's not a silver bullet. Just as you talk about ecologies, you have to address all those layers of the ecology when supporting students. As far as resources, and to just complicate this more, this isn't just an on-campus issue. The resource I provided was the Movement Advancement Project. Had a report they issued in 2013 about LGBT workers of color, and in that they cited that LGBT youth of color are the less likely to go to college. So this isn't just, students we have on our campus. This is a pipeline issue, just getting them to college. So we need to think about not just the students who are on campus, but who are those students we aren't even getting to our campuses, and how do we create a space for them?
Thanks so much, Trace. Zahis.
Okay. I am having a bit of difficulty because the acknowledgement, again, to everyone has just being thankful for everyone that's here, and quite honestly, just the healing power that this has had over me and my time being a part of this panel, and recognizing the healing power, just being able to share our historias, our testimony, our comunidad. I'm just so thankful for being here and for being a part of this. And thank you, Heather, for bringing us all together in this formalized way. I think one of the things that I want to leave, and I included a resource to kind of talk through about this, embrace the messiness. This is going to be a consistent conversation. This is going to be a consistent uphill, around the hill, down the hill, through the hill conversation. But we need to be talking about more intentionally, not in the sense of, I need the words, I need the terminology, I need to use this particular placement of A, B, C equation to make things happen. It's being able to say, if a student walks through my door and is trying to acknowledge with me, I'm finding my indigenous roots, and I've also recognized that I'm in that connection to Latinx, and I also have to recognize that our Latinx experience was colonized. How do I embrace these shared heritages? And it's a real experience. More and more students are exploring who they are. More professionals are exploring who they are. How we just honor and recognize that if we're all willing to kind of walk through it together, whether it feel like that sinking sand or if it's just some muddiness to it all, that's what's going to make us better. That's what's going to make us greater. And that's what's going to be able to help really revamp and really continue on in a new frontier for student affairs.
Thank you so much. Just to add my appreciation, I can't tell all of you as much as I really want to say that the time today has been fabulous. I've learned a lot. I see you, I appreciate you, and I hope that we can remain in connection past this. So thank you for your time to all of the panelists today. Just really quickly, I know there's a couple of people still watching. We want to let folks know about our upcoming episodes. My next episode is actually going to be a reprise of another very large panel of Student Affairs Master's students 2 years later. So revisiting what their experience has been like in the first 2 years of their new professional life. And then in August, Tony will be talking about mid-level professionals in student affairs with Maureen Wilson and several other scholars and practitioners. There's a new JCSD article that just came out this month. So you can learn about these and all of the on Higher Ed Live by subscribing to our iTunes podcast. I am Heather Shea Gasser. Thank you so much for watching, everyone. Thank you again to my panel, and we hope you make it a great week.
Thank you.
Thanks.